So my brothers and my sisters, as we embrace this urgency of creating the beloved community, now is the time to be love. Love means understanding, redemptive goodwill toward all, which seeks nothing in return. So be love by implementing the demands of justice to eliminate the school to prison pipeline that has so many black children entrapped. Be love by correcting voting policies that seek to suppress the votes of millions of black and brown people. Be love and implement the demands of justice by transforming a society that is disproportionately violent toward black lives, including black transgendered lives and indigenous lives. Be love and correct false narratives and economic policies that continue to divide and pit poor and working class black and white people against each other. Be love and implement demands of justice where systems and structures are deconstructed and lead the way of living in community that reimagines just, humane, equitable, and sustainable policies, practices, and behaviors. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them who hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and abuse you. Be love and do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God.
Welcome to tonight's Beloved Community Talks episode, Faith and Democracy, a dialogue for hope and action. I'm Dr. Rashad Rich. I will be the moderator this evening. It is a privilege to be in a position to explore with you the powerful and dynamic leaders of faith who are advancing democracy and justice. You're part of that also. In a world faced with deep divisions, we already know what is at stake. I tell my college students often that we are a combination of 3 E's: experiences, exposures, and environment. When we want to change the trajectory of a person or the trajectory of a nation, we must change the trajectory of our experiences, exposures, and environment. You see, I believe love creates love. In a world where we're faced with such deep divisions, our conversation tonight rests upon principles rooted in courage, understanding, the pursuit of justice, reflecting Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence as a way of life, not a talking point, not a memo, but a way of life. These guiding principles remind us that true strength lies in standing firmly yet compassionately against injustice, aiming to transform the very nature of our hearts and build what Dr. King envisioned as the beloved community. Tonight, we'll discuss how faith communities can lead in creating positive change right here and throughout the nation. Nonviolent resistance to social injustices. Somebody once said, obviously, the only time you can sustain change is when that change is achieved by nonviolent action. We'll dive into how faith can be the uniting force, grounding us in truth and compassion while making sure that communities are empowered to embrace love over hate, empowered to embrace justice over injustice, and empowered to embrace connection over division. We're honored to have with us a distinguished panel, guests who have embodied these ideals throughout their work and their faith. They live by the code. Let's prepare to be inspired. Let's prepare to be challenged. Let's prepare to be equipped. Tonight, we're going to take some meaningful Q&A, some opportunity, time to talk it through and have a conversation together, hopefully fostering better understanding of how to approach the divisions among us. Welcome to the Beloved Community Talks again. Faith and Democracy, a dialogue for hope and action. As early, I'm Dr. Rashad Rich. I will be your moderator. I want to highlight the reality of divisions that we all feel in this nation today. All of these divisions are before us, but there's also significant unity and also a methodology to make sure that we can bring all under the cover of love. You can love beyond the hate. I want to acknowledge the current divisions also that permeate from inside of us, because the reality is the nation is simply a macrocosm of the microcosm of self. Dr. King taught a transformative principle, the principle of nonviolence, as the foundation for courageous and transformative action. It takes somebody truly strong to transform by way of love. The purpose is to explore faith as a force for justice, to explore faith as a force for justice rooted in compassion and resilience. I would like to now introduce the guests. Let's meet our distinguished panelists who bring the spirit of nonviolent leadership to work and to their lives every day. First, we have Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, a renowned advisor, strategist, and co-founder of the Skinner Leadership Institute. Dr. Williams Skinner has dedicated her life to public policy and community service, and her work spans healthcare, criminal justice, and even voting rights. Welcome. Next, we're joined by Reverend Samuel Rodriguez. The Reverend leads a church known as New Season and is president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, recognized as a foremost Latino faith leader. Reverend Rodriguez has advised multiple U.S. presidents, and his influence extends across religion, culture, and policy. We welcome. And finally, we also welcome Dr. Dana Butler Bass, an award-winning author and one of America's trusted commentators on faith and spirituality. With a PhD in religious studies, Dana's work brings clarity on how faith intersects politics and culture. We welcome all of our guests today. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to start by having you introduce yourself. I want this to be a conversation more so than just a Q&A. I think individuals are very excited about the opportunity that lies ahead, but also there's a significant amount of intrepidation, obviously, because in many ways, this is our first time here in the modern era. Let me begin with Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner. I want you to give us an introduction of what you do, your context to your organization and your institute.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am the president of Skinner Leadership Institute. We are committed to raising up a generation of high character, high integrity, morally centered leaders, rooted in the belief that everyone is created in the image of God and deserve respect and dignity. And we do that. We cross religious divides, political divides, and the others. We do bridge building work. I am currently co-convening the Faith United to Save Democracy, a 10-state voter justice campaign committed to helping most vulnerable voters by organizing over 900 poll chaplain and peacekeepers from Alabama to Wisconsin.
Wow, that's significant. Dr. Dana Butler Bass, Dr. Bass.
My work takes place mostly in the context of mainline Protestant churches. And I always think that mainline is a bit of a misnomer because once upon a time, these were the biggest churches in America. They aren't anymore. These are the ecumenical and liturgical traditions that go by pretty old-fashioned names: Episcopal, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian. And they're largely white communities, although not exclusively so. Some denominations with more diversity than others. But what they do have is an enormous amount of theological diversity within them. And these communities over the years have prided themselves on both being leaders in the ecumenical movement with an emphasis on unity, but at the very same time, they've often been internally painfully divided over all kinds of political and social issues. And so it's been a very fractious and fractured community. And my work as an author, as an independent educator, has been in their midst for 3 decades now, and is, I think people would recognize it as both ironic, as trying to make peace within the mainline, and prophetic, and that is trying to get people who have been really wounded, I think, institutionally, back toward their prophetic ministries of justice. And so that's really where I've spent an enormous amount of time. These are people I understand really well, and I've worked with every mainline denomination. And I love these old traditions, and I think that they still have a lot to bring to American conversation on faith and democracy. I also write something called The Cottage, which is a very popular Substack newsletter. And this this fall, I've been going around with some other writers, and we've been doing faith and democracy rallies in churches, mostly Methodist, Baptist, and I think we have an Episcopal church coming up. So.
Very good. Thank you. Reverend Rodriguez, Samuel Rodriguez, what is your hope, given the advocacy that you bring from your perspective and organization?
Yeah, by the grace of God, I pastor a multi-ethnic church in Sacramento and Los Angeles, multi-site. It's 40% African-American, 40% Caucasian, 20% Latino, Asian, and Native American. And it's primarily millennial, 68% millennial. So it truly looks like heaven. And with the church and with the NHCLC, the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference that you referenced previously, the Latino churches across America that are the evangelical side of the Protestant framework that was laid out by Dr. Bass, we stand committed to reconciling Billy Graham's message with Dr. King's march. You walk into the foyer of my church, you'll see 2 big photos, Billy Graham and Dr. King, and then it says righteousness and justice. So we're all about that. With the NHCLC, we launched this year what we call NHCLC 2.0, the Center for Ministerial Health, focusing on spiritual, physical, mental, relational, and financial health. We are launching the Center for Public Policy and the Center for Kingdom Collaboration. So our objective is not to advance the donkey or the elephant's agenda, but to advance exclusively the lamb's agenda. So it's not the donkey or the elephant, it's the lamb. And focusing on that, serving as a reconciliatory prescription for a very divided time. And we do it in English, and we also do it in Spanish.
Good stuff. All right, I want to talk about polarization. And I don't think any election cycle we've heard the word polarization used as much as this election cycle. And extremes can go as far as the human imagination, basically. So polarization is a big deal. But I want to ask you, Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, about polarization. How has political polarization in particular affected the community of faith and also the engagement of the democratic process? And what are the solutions that we can bring through systematic elements and institutions in order to correct it?
Well, thank you very much. What we do know about Dr. King is that his Kinging and Nonviolence was rooted in the teachings of Jesus, but not only in teachings of Jesus, of loving your neighbor being the one who's least like you, but also in Genesis 1:26, that everyone is created in the image of God, the Imago Dei, and deserves dignity and respect, which we do not tend to give each other. I think the church itself, the integrity of our faith and the integrity of our democracy is at stake right now, because the polarization that we used to be called on to be the bridge builders and the reconcilers for, according to our gospel, is coming from the church. We have bought into either sides of politics more than we have the kingdom of God and the agenda of God and the teachings of Jesus. So when people hear us today talk about politics, they think that we are representing a candidate and not the kingdom. King, that was so different from Dr. King's philosophy. You know, Dr. King did not attack Bull Connor as a demon. He attacked racism and injustice as the demon, and I think that's what we have forgotten in the body of Christ today. I think the answer for that, well, let me just say that one of the things that I know from having worked on Capitol Hill with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle is that when I first started working on Capitol Hill, compromise and negotiation was okay. In fact, you know, you had Orrin Hatch on one side and Kennedy on another side, but they found a way to make things work on behalf of American people, if it was jobs or justice or climate justice or whatever. That's a dirty word today, compromise. It's a dirty word now. It's almost frowned upon. And I think we have to go back. We have to, you know, a prophet by the name of James Baldwin said, you can't fix what you won't face. Jesus said it differently. He says, truth will set you free. We have to face who we are. And to say that the church itself needs healing before we can, you know, it says heal yourself first. So I think what we've tried to do, quite frankly, in one of the solutions, I think, is focusing back on the basics, the Imago Dei. So I run Faiths United to Save Democracy. It's multi-faith, it's multiracial, it's multi-generational. We could not agree between imams and Christian pastors, mainline and conservative, by the way, or Jewish rabbis, except on that one thing. And what we focus on, what brought us together, is that after 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, there was a backlash you wouldn't believe in the legislature, where 33 very severe, almost 1960s type voting rights laws were not even voting rights, I would say voter injustice laws were passed, even criminalizing giving food and water. I mean, that's a Good Samaritan act. We could be arrested today for doing. And so what we've done is mobilize people of all races to go out to first get educated. So we started with Kingian Nonviolence on Martin Luther King Day this year, talking about what the issues are. You have to educate people first. That's what Dr. King, that how are we going to make a difference? How do we reach young people who are turned off? How do we come together in our communities? And we try to replicate that in 10 states. And so that's what we're doing. It's possible to do, but you can't do it demonizing the other person. I can disagree with you, but if I'm not even willing to talk to you, if I'm not willing to be in the same room with you, if I'm not willing to ask you, how did you reach your opinion, then I can't be part of a solution. So that's what we are doing. And I'm so excited. The majority of our poll chaplain and peacekeepers are white. And the peacekeeping training is rooted in Kingian nonviolence. So I'm really excited about that.
Let me hop on that point about compromise. And I want to go to Dr. Bass for this, because Dr. William Skinner says something quite interesting that I want to echo, and that's the reality of the word compromise. She says it almost become like a bad word. Well, it is a bad word with some. And there was a time that word was very celebrated by Democrats, Republicans, Independents, those that were political and apolitical. They celebrated the dynamic idea of compromise. You have the job of working with individuals in the faith community, leaders that may have parishioners who are antithetical to some of the teachings of Christ for the teachings of somebody else. So how do you combine the spiritual values, the political expressions, in a way that allows for democracy to remain intact?
I actually love this set of questions. I'm an Episcopalian, and this tradition that I'm part of goes back 500 years, and we were founded as a compromise tradition. between the Protestant Reformation and traditional Catholicism in England. And so the original, the mother church, as it were, of the Episcopal Church is the Church of England. And it was founded as a via media, a middle way between these two extremes. And so I've actually spent my whole adult spiritual life in a faith tradition that theologically, historically, and liturgically prides itself on being able to hold together a whole bunch of difference. And that capacity isn't just present in the Episcopal Church. It really is something that I think is a deep gift of the mainline. It doesn't make it easy to be a mainliner, because especially right now, when you talk about polarization, I always kind of envy my friends who are in other religious traditions, because you can look at, say, Jews in America, and 80 or 85% of them are Democrats, and a small portion are Republicans. You look at white evangelicals, and you have the flip proportions. The mainline is 50-50. And so all of our denominational meetings are, some of our congregations, every congregation I was in this fall speaking and preaching, the pastor called me up in advance and literally said, "We're a purple church." And that means when I'm walking in a door, I never quite know who I'm speaking to or what is going to come in any direction at me. And I've learned a lot in these communities, partly that we actually have tools that enable us to be together. And when we do it well, we can do it with honesty, and we can share our stories, and we can offer our perspectives, but we can also come together. And I think that the three things that hold these traditions together are, very briefly, really ancient spiritual practices. One is the practice of the lectionary, which is an established body of readings. That's a 3-year cycle of reading the Bible, really almost the whole of the Bible, in congregational settings, and using that as a template for preaching. And so if you go into nearly any mainline church, and this lectionary is shared also by the Catholic Church. So the liturgical Catholics, which are all of them, and Protestants who are mainliners, we share readings every single Sunday. And so that means that there's preaching going on across the board on the same texts, and it creates a really interesting common conversation across our congregations. So there's the lectionary, there's our baptismal vows. And one of those baptismal vows is, I will work for justice and peace and respect the dignity of every human person. And that's the one that I've really been holding up for all of the congregations I work with this year, is that, yes, justice and peace, and respect the dignity of every human being. And so that is the call that is said over us at our baptism, and we rehearse it. We actually say it over and over again in our own lives every year, several times a year, when we recite our baptismal vows in public. And the third thing is the table. We actually have, in most of these churches, communion on a weekly basis. And that means that every single week you have to have communion with people you might not like, and people who you know are voting differently. And that is a really powerful practice. And if it is well, I think, preached and well understood in a congregation, you begin to understand what it's really like to sit at table and have difference. So while these are deeply divided communities, they also possess sort of tools that go beyond themselves, and tools that have been proven over many generations that they actually do build for peace and do establish parameters for community that at least enable the conversation to continue on.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to go to Reverend Rodriguez for this question. I believe, I have a novel idea. I believe that most people actually like other people. I really do. I believe, generally speaking, you actually like people. The challenge is, or the problem, is that society, especially those in hierarchy and leadership, they have ways of utilizing social tools to manipulate realities and narratives that will then indoctrinate an individual or a group to now polarize to the negative rather than raising the collective consciousness of a particular group. You have a very diverse ministry. So here's your question. How can faith communities foster empathy and understanding among members with different cultural and political views?
We are compelled to reconcile the very prescription laid out by Dr. Bass and Dr. Skinner. It begins, number one, everyone's created in the image of God, the Imago Dei, Dr. Skinner. So everyone around you, Republican, Democrat, Independent, I'm going to have to say this, unfortunately, Yankee and Dodger fans, they all carry the image of God. Everyone. They all carry the image of God. Christian, non-Christian, atheist, agnostic, gay and straight, Muslim, Jews. Every human being carries the Imago Dei, which compels me not to tolerate. As a follower of Jesus, I have never been called to tolerate. I have been called to love. We go beyond tolerance. We go to the love level. So I respect you and love you, even though we don't agree politically, because you carry the image of God. The second thing we must do immediately is empathy. We must engage with empathy. Even with the most diverse, radical, extreme ideologies, we're not embracing the ideology, God forbid. If it's an ideology that's counterintuitive to the spirit of truth and love, to the spirit of Christ, we can't tolerate it because we are what we tolerate. But we have empathy as it pertains to having a conversational platform that will enable you and I to be able to communicate at that basic God-ordained level that we are all created in the image of God. So it begins with the Imago Dei. It evolves into empathy. And then we create space. We create space for what? For compromise. We create space for a reconciliatory prescription where we meet in the middle without ever sacrificing truth on the altar of political or cultural expediency. It is a beautiful thing. It sounds like utopia, but it's doable. In my church, here it is. I have Republicans. I have Democrats. The majority are millennials, so guess what? They're independent. They're independent because millennials and Generation Z are independent. But I have Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and we go to the table and we engage in our liturgy together. And we go both to the altar and to the table together because that's who we are. So it's completely doable, but we have to be intentional about it. And it begins with me. It begins with you. On occasion, I have sinned. I have deviated from that very standard in some of my rhetoric, where I am immediately convicted by precious Holy Spirit who says, Tammy, stop that and fix it. You drank the Kool-Aid. You became emotionally exuberant. Come back. That's not who I am. That's not what I do. So we all have to be sensitive to the convicting power of the Comforter. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it's beautiful. It's terrific tension. The convicting power of the Comforter who will drive us to that table of reconciliation. But we have to be intentional and we have to preach that message of empathy, the Imago Dei, compromise, and prescription, reconciliation, all in the mighty name of Christ.
Dear brother, I just want to make sure I clarify what you're saying so that I have a good basis for my next question. You're saying basically there's a required conversation. You got to have the bare minimum conversation before compromise every time, right?
You have the conversation is a requirement. Okay. We can't assume anything. We have to be able to have that conversation, and we have to sit across each other, even if we disagree. Let's have that initial conversation before I come to a definitive conclusion, where in my mind, subconsciously or consciously, I label you as an extremist or whatever it may be. Let's have that conversation, and that conversation must begin with empathy. With empathy, not bias, but empathy. I may not agree with you, but I understand. I understand that you have your own sentiment and your own worldview. So it begins with empathy.
Got it. Dr. William Skinner, I'm going to go to you, and it's kind of a follow-up. to what Reverend Rodriguez said about connecting and having those conversations as the bare minimum, because we're all made in the image and likeness of God. And so there's this bare minimum threshold here that must be maintained. In what ways can faith communities advocate for democratic norms, democratic values, and social justice in the current political climate when many are refusing to even have a conversation?
Well, it really starts with a reflection by each one of us. Who's on your list to talk to on a weekly or monthly basis? If they all look like you and think like you, you're not part of the solution. That's number one. Okay. So no matter what we say, we represent what we do. For example, I have a Super Bowl party every year. I make sure it's not all Black people. That would be my easier. If they were all Black people who like Kansas City Chiefs, I'd be great. I would have no problem. We'd have a great time. I got to invite some of the losing teams like the Ravens or whomever, So the issue is that I've got to practice in my own life, in my own connection, in my own reality, what I am saying I believe. I am a pro-life, pro-traditional value, traditional marriage Democrat, which means it sounds like an oxymoron, and in a way it is. Okay. So it means that I have to interrogate my own party on a consistent basis and not be afraid to say, if I stand alone, I do stand alone with Jesus. Okay. So the question is, do we have the courage? Do we have the courage to stand up even to the party that we represent to say this party is not perfect? People are right now having a collective nervous breakdown over the election. This country is about to implode from within. One group of people feels that if the other group wins, we're going to become way too brown for the comfort of white people, right? The other group, and it's going to become, we're going to become un-American. The borders are going to be open to every whatever. Okay, so that's one person's fear. The other people are fearing that we're going to become a Hitler-like dictatorship that only works for white men in power. That's going on right now. And the church is at the center of it. How do we get out of that? One of the groups that I've been blessed to be a part of was a really uncomfortable one for me to be a part of. And that was with 2 years ago, invited to be part of a group of there were 12 white conservative pastors whose members in 10, I think, states were from the opposite political party. I'll just say that. We're all nonpartisan here. And then 12 Black pastors, right? Totally different worldview. And almost not even reading the same Bible. And my job as a facilitator support was to try to see where we could find common ground. It's taken 2 years just to kind of understand that we do serve the same God. So I think we have to understand this is going to take time when we get started. But you can't do this until you get started, until you're willing to say, you know what, we have some problems. There's some illnesses here, and I don't know how to fix it, but I got to go to a doctor, and the doctor is not my party, it's Jesus. Okay, so that's where I'm saying we've got to face is physician, heal thyself. We need healing from within. I got to start with Barbara Williams Skinner and figure out how it starts with me.
Okay. To that point, we're flat out of time. I wish we had more time. What an amazing round of answers for so many who will be able to enjoy this content. I'm reminded of when Jesus said, for the kingdom of God is within the heart of man, within the heart of humanity. And I believe that every single one of you have echoed that point over and over again. And it truly does start from within. Thank you to our incredible guest. I want to make sure that people go to the QR code that you see right there. You can make a contribution. You can support the beloved community, and more. Please scan to take the survey as well. Thank you to the guests. Thank you for sharing your insights, your experiences, and committing to fostering a just and inclusive society. Your contributions have enriched today's discussion and highlighted how faith can be a powerful force in addressing some of the most pressing issues of our time. As we reflect on today's conversation, it's clear that the path forward involves each and every single one of us. There is no one person who could solve all of this. We all have a role in the community to make it happen. Dr. King's principles of nonviolence remind us that change requires both courage and it requires compassion. By choosing love over hate and justice over complacency, we contribute to building what Dr. King called the beloved community. This work is not always easy, but it's necessary. It's required. And it's what our faith and democracy calls us to do. Let us not forget the profound impact of our voices. You see, voting represents a direct mechanism through which we can actually create change, serving as the cornerstone of a robust democracy, a democracy where you have a voice and you continue to have a voice each time. I urge each and every single one of you to remain engaged, well-informed, and actively participate in both local and national elections. Through voting, we fulfill our civic responsibilities. We ensure that our values are reflected in the societal framework. Today's discussion is brought to you by the King Center's Better Together initiative. To hear more about this program, I would like to introduce you to Damian Madison and Lee May, program managers for Better Together. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much.
So good to be here. Thank you for having us.
Good to have you both. I want to make sure we get into some quick Q&A. So first, I'm going to go to Damian. Tell us a little bit about Better Together.
Yes, Better Together is a new initiative of the King Center. It actually is designed for the faith space in particular. It's actually designed as interfaith, and it's designed to empower and equip the faith space with Kingian nonviolence principles to help us eradicate any barrier to being beloved in our community in which we live. And so really being rooted in nonviolence, learning the steps and principles to nonviolence, again, Kingian nonviolence. And how do we apply that with the intersection of our faith to eradicate barriers to being beloved? Again, I love how in the discussion earlier, there's just talk about compromise and having conversation. And one of the things about Kingian nonviolence is how do we employ engagement and conversation and discourse with people who we disagree with, recognizing that I can disagree with you, but I don't have to destroy you. So how do we do so in love? How do we do so, again, employing our faith from whatever perspective, how we navigate it in a healthy and humane way?
Very well said. And Lee, I'm going to go to you. What would the King Center like to accomplish with these conversations, specifically with the model that Damon just spoke of?
Absolutely. The spreading of Kingian nonviolence, the message, the principles, the strategies that are directly connected with that. What we've done is created content that will allow people in a diversity of ways to fully understand and engage Kingian nonviolence. And what we want to do is spread that message throughout the country and frankly throughout the world, to engage more and more communities of faith, faith leaders, members, communities, and congregations all across the country. So the more we can spread the message, we understand conversations like this dealing with faith and democracy can be understood better and can actually be leaned into the better as a result.
You know, there are a lot of faith organizations, churches, nonprofits, et cetera. They don't understand. They don't know the methodology. They have general understanding, but how can they get much more involved? I'm going to pose that to both of you.
Well, yeah, I mean, a good first step would be the QR code on the screen right there. Again, plug in with us, get more information about Kingian nonviolence. But in particular, to Lee's point, we have created environments through, and again, cohorts, trainings, and even exposure series from Kenyan experts to learn what is Kenyan nonviolence, how we apply it to our to our faith, our world, our personhood. How do we live it out personally, and even our organizations?
Absolutely. And just continue those different opportunities that we've provided as we spread the message. We are confident that that message will resonate. It will infiltrate the individual. Because you can't transform a community if you're not transforming individuals as well. So we're excited about it. We're going to continue to encourage people to check out the QR code, the links that are popping up as well. Click those links to find out more information about Better Together and how you can bring that to a community, to your faith community, and get more involved as well.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you to everyone. Love, justice, and active engagement. Those are the keys to transformation. Remember, take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of the planet. We appreciate your time today.